We good to go? All right. Okay, so welcome to the Mahwah Museum's lecture series. I'm Cathy Moran Hajo. I'm the Vice President and the Archives Director of the museum. And a little bit about myself. I was born in Long Island, but grew up in Mahwah. We moved here in '69. And I lived here until, took a little break when I got married, came back, and then we left again in 2021. So I'm not in Mahwah anymore, but I still am here. I'm a historian I work at Ramapo College, and I do mostly women's history projects. I do the Jane Addams papers there right now. So I got invited into the museum about 10 years ago, and I've been here since. So, whoops, what have I done? Sorry. Anyway. The way I do most of these kind of lectures that I do on genealogy and on this one on house history is to do an introduction, because I don't consider myself to be an expert house history researcher. Tom Dunn, the former president and archivist, has been sending me some of his materials, and they're all these plats from the Revolutionary War, and I'm just like, I'm not going that deep. But what I want to do is get you interested and excited about the idea of trying to figure out the history of your house and the property and the area, so that you can, it feels you get a deeper connection to your house and to the town. So every house has a history. Even if your house was built 2 years ago, it was built on a piece of property that has been in town since there was a town. So I think that you're not going to be able to find a lot about your specific house, but the property and the neighborhood, all that will be something that helps you to understand better. So there's a lot of variation in the documentation of the houses in town and everywhere, if you're not from Mahwah. But there's a lot of clues that you can use to try to say, okay, I can figure out some things about my house. So like I said, I'm learning along with you. I decided I was going to do this talk a year ago, and I started reading books and looking up websites and trying to find things and doing a little bit of research as I went. So I have a sense of at least how you get started. And it made me very much more interested in learning about the house I live in now, and the people that used to live in it and things like that. So some of the things, the main things that you'll be thinking about is, how old is the house? How long has this area that your house is in been settled by people in Mahwah or wherever? And then the people that live there. Okay, so organizing your research is really important. If you haven't started yet, start by organizing. The worst thing you can do is just have piles of stuff everywhere, which I don't want to admit is exactly how my files are right now. My digital files are a mess. But if you don't find a history of your house that someone else has already written, you're going to be piecing it together bit by bit. And I think that it's really important to try to get organized as you start. And then you can see things like, where do I have a gap in the history of my house that I might want to focus on? Like if I don't know how it got from one owner to another, you can say, okay, I see that I don't know this stuff, so let me figure out how to approach it. So you could use just a notebook, you could use file folders, you could use a Google Drive or word processing. It's just a matter of putting it all in one place. I think sometimes using a word like a Microsoft Word or any of the other ones is good, because you can put URLs in there. So if you have a link to a picture, you can put that URL in, and then next time you click it, it goes right to the website. So while it's great to do it in a paper book, sometimes who wants to write those things out, right? And if you get one digit wrong, you can't find anything. It's also really important to document where you got the information from. Some sources are more reliable than others, and some sources they will conflict. And so you have to try to figure out which one is right. My sister bought a house in Hawthorne, and when they bought it, I think they thought it was built in 1920. That's what the realtor told them. And then they found newspapers in the wall from 1890. So, it's like, just because it says a date on the realtor information doesn't always mean it's right. So that, be open to doing research to figure out, are the facts that actually true? So also looking at dead ends is really important as you go. If you searched through the deeds database in Bergen County and you found nothing, write down that you did it, because 4 years from now, you're not going to remember and you're going to do it again. It's not like it's changed. So I think sometimes it's like keeping a list of where you look and where you found nothing is also really helpful. But the most important thing is to source everything. If you pull a copy from a newspaper, write the information on it, what newspaper, what date. If you get it from a book, just write stuff on there. Make sure you cite everything, because later on, when you have all kinds of facts that don't make any sense, it's really difficult to figure out where did I get this piece of information from? All right, so I'm going to go to the basics first. So when was your house built? How many people know when their house was built? Yeah, not, right? Nothing. Right, yeah, so that there are trying to figure out when your house is built sometimes can be tricky, sometimes it's easy. It just depends on, how old it is. The older the house, sometimes the more difficult it is to figure out exactly when it was built, but you can find markers that will tell you if it existed in 1860, but it didn't exist in 1830 when there's a map. So there's ways to go back. There's a database. This is the one my sister used, so or the realtors use. But there's a database that I'm going to put the slides on the web where you can click on the links and you'll be able to do it. But if you go to Bergen County's website, there's a section called Land Records, and this database has records from 1970 on. So any house that was sold as of 1970 will have a record in here that has the buyer and the seller, and it includes information like when the house was built, how many square feet it is, and things like that. It also has the block and the lot. It often has the style of house. This one here, oh no, I didn't print out a page. I found it a little weird doing this talk because I usually do my own house, and I was like, I'm going to do the house I lived in Mahwah, and I'm like, wait, we don't own that house anymore. It's kind of weird to talk about someone else's house this way. So I didn't put a picture of my old house. But again, this is a start, but you're going to check it and make sure that it makes sense. I think the house we live in now says it was built in 1937, and I know that it was built in at least 1931 from newspaper research. So it's like, it's a start, but it's not the be all and end all. Some ways of telling how old your house is are what style of home it is. There are certain styles that are older, and they're not, unless there's a revival of a house, it's a house style, it's not going to have been built earlier. The Dutch colonial houses, if you live in one, is not, it's going to be an old house. There's no way that something that looks like the LaRue Van Horn house up here was built in 1980. It's just not going to happen. The Tudor Revival, that's a house we live in right now. That house is popular from 1880s to 1930s. It's not popular earlier than that. So you kind of start to build just a general sense of what times they might have been built just by the architectural styles. This one at the bottom is a more modern house. It's probably from mid-century, 20th century to the late 20th century. So all of these patterns help you to figure out how old the house is, and there's a lot of architectural history that goes into it. I think, yes. There's a book on the back table, which I'm going to keep at the museum, so if anyone wants to use it later. It's the Field Guide to American Homes. It lists all the different styles of houses, like this one's Gothic Revival. It tells you what the features are. So if you have certain types of windows, or if your chimneys are arranged in a certain way, you can look at those features and figure out what style home you have. And that will help you to understand how it's built. And the chapters on each of the styles give a lot of illustrations of what they look like. This is their picture of the LaRue Van Horn house, which looks very different from the ones we have. So this, I don't know, it doesn't have any citation on it, so I don't know when this picture was taken. But this book was first published, I think, in the late 50s. Or 60s or something like that. So it could be that that's about when this picture was taken. But it will give you a lot of different information about what you call things in your house. So you'll know what cornices are and what each of the ways that they cover porches. They all have names. And sometimes if you're Googling a house and you're trying to look for houses that have similar styles, having that architectural vocabulary can help you to figure out what it is that you're trying to find. And they have a lot of pictures. One of the other things I think that's really helpful if you're researching a home in Mahwah is to know what neighborhood you live in. A few years back, we did an exhibit that broke the town into these neighborhoods, and each of the neighborhoods have a different kind of development story. So if you're from Fardale or Massanicus, your property was developed much later than other sections of Mahwah. They were mostly farm areas, and then those sections became subdivisions and homes. And usually that's after World War II. If you're from West Mahwah, a lot of those homes came in when the brake shoe factory came in 1900. So there's different stories in different sections of town. Even if you can't tell exactly the story of your house, learning about that neighborhood gives you a sense of when the homes were built and what the people were like who lived there. So there's a lot, the exhibit that we put up, we still have most of the information about it. So if anyone's interested in the history of whichever neighborhood you're from, we can try to help out with that. So another thing that is important to find out is if your house was part of a development. There might not be a lot of information about your specific house, but if you know that it was part of a place like, Rio Vista or Cragmere, that can help you to find newspaper coverage of the development being built, so that you may not find your specific address in the paper, but you'll find that Cragmere went up. So Cragmere and Rio Vista still have labels today, but most of the developments that came in as a place where they bought up a farm and put in a bunch of houses, the signs and the names of those neighborhoods are gone. So they're, you have to do a little bit of research to find out what the thing might have been called way back when it was built. I think that you can also sometimes find information about the people who created the architects and the builders of the homes, because they're all built in a development by the same place. So I think that that's a fun one to do. This is the one that, this is where I used to live, but it was called Whitestone, and that sign was on a tree. It was nailed on a tree down on Wyckoff Avenue. Yeah, I remember. And it fell down one day, and my dad took it. He put it in his basement, so it's still there, 50 years later. But because we've always known the name of the development, because we were the first people that bought the house. We were there when they built it. So I could find newspaper articles about the development going in. I could find about the person who built the house. And I think this guy, John Hilla, was the person. And as soon as I saw the name in the paper, I'm like, I remember that guy. My dad used to always be complaining about that guy because he didn't do the thing he was, it was just like, you just need that little spur to remember, like, sometimes these things. So we can find advertisements that shows all the different houses that were in the development. And then because we happen to be the first owners of the house, we have pictures. We used to go and drive up there on the weekend and take pictures of them building it. So, I mean, I feel like I should give them to the people who live there now, but yeah, it's kind of, it's so like you can get this kind of rich sense of what was there and what wasn't. So the other thing that we'll think about is who lived in the house before you. And it's sometimes you think, well, who cares who lived in the house before me, right? It's like, I have it now. But having that like a string of people who lived there before you, you start to it starts to personalize things in your house. Like, my sister's house, when they moved in, there were these weird things like a washboard that had been epoxied onto the door in the basement, like as a decorative element. And it's like, this is so weird. And then later on, you find out who lived in the house before you. Oh, like, this guy probably did that. It looks like, so it kind of builds it in your head. Like, oh, I know who these people were, and I know what they did to my house. So there could be whole generations. It might be a whole family who owned it over and over, or it might be a whole bunch of series of new people that live in the house. But I really like I found it really fascinating to learn about the people who built our house and who lived in it before us. And, you want to know more, and you can't always get a lot, but you can get a sense of who they were. All right, so we're going to look at some resources that will help you to find information about your houses. All right, so it's the one I hate to do because I don't like talking to people, but talk to people. Other people know things about your house. If you moved into a neighborhood and there's an old family that lives next door to you, talk to them. They probably know much more about your house than you do. They can give you names of people who used to live there. They might know stories about the house, or like what went on there. I mean, and most times they'll be happy to talk to you. They want to get to know their new neighbor, right? Especially people that have more than one generation in a house. There might be someone down the street that's lived there forever. I think John, I don't know, he's upstairs still, I guess, but his family's lived in the house since, like, I don't know, from 1910 or something. So he's seen neighbors come and go all around him. It's like you can get a lot of information from them. You can also get photographs if they've been in your backyard in the 50s at a party, right? You can find things like that. If you know the names of the people who used to live in your house, you can use things like genealogy databases. You can use Facebook groups. there's a you lived in Mahwah Facebook group. If you move into a house, you could put up, hey, I just moved into this house. Does anybody know anything about it? And you might find someone who lived there in the 70s who will say, oh yeah, you're in my old house now. And you start a conversation. I mean, it's really kind of, it makes you feel a little bit more like the caretaker of the house. And, you're just part of what's going on there. You can also talk to your local historical society, which is us. We don't know everything about every house, I can tell you that. But when you know the people's names, it helps us because it's easier for us. Things aren't generally organized by address. They're organized mostly by people's names. So if you can give us the names of a person who lived in your house, we can try to find them easier than if it's just a street address. So I get that a lot. People will say, do you know the history of 237, Island Road? And I'm like, no, I don't. But if you tell me who lived in it, I might be able to help you, or I might, we can try. But the more information you have, the easier it is for us to help. So some of the things that we have, I put a few things that we have out on the back table for you to look at. But again, I think I said some of this already, but knowing the names of the people is a giant help for me. We might not be able to find something immediately, but I'm going to get a bulletin board. I'm just going to put up like the names of people that we're looking for. And as we go through archives and we process collections, if we start seeing names or places that we know someone's looking for, it'll help us to remember to find them. I will say that our collection is primarily focused on both Cragmere and the houses up on Ramapo Valley Road, the Havermeyer houses and those kinds of things. Those are the people who saved things and who gave them to the archives. But we do have some materials on other sections like Fardale and West Mahwah. Those are the sections, honestly, I want to collect in more. I want to get more information about the families that lived in West Mahwah and the families that lived in Fardale, because we don't have we don't have a kind of even representation of the whole town. Our collections are also stronger in the 19th century, up to maybe about the 1950s, and it really dies off. And I think I've figured out is because the Historical Society started in the 60s. And when you start, you're not really interested in stuff that happened, 15 years ago. It's like, that's not history. No, let's get the old stuff. But nobody, I'm not collecting stuff that happened right now. So, it's just a matter of you have to start appreciating the stuff that's being created and then start gathering it again. And we also don't have a lot of space, so we do our best. But we will be happy to take copies of anything that you guys come up with, any histories of your house. We know you keep your originals, but we will scan things and make them available to other people. There are always also people in the museum that know more about different areas of town than others. Like Tom Dunn is a great resource on the Ramapo Valley, on Cragmere. He knows far more than I ever will about those topics. And if you ask a question about that, I will turf it to Tom. I think Warren probably knows more about Fardale than I do. And if I have a question about Fardale, I'll be like, hey, do you have any help? So, but send the questions in and we'll try to get a network of people who might be able to help with that. And then we just got this really neat little collection. I was hoping, they said 9, I think they said 9 inches, and I thought they said 9 feet. So I was like really excited, but it's really 9, and it's that big. But there's a box of it in the back there. It's the Albert Bogert and John Rogers real estate collection, which apparently was about 200 boxes of stuff that they gave to the Ridgewood Library. And the Ridgewood said, we don't want all this. So they broke out all the Mahwah stuff and said, do you want it? And we said, sure. So it's got these things like these cool brochures for houses in Mahwah. And it's going to be very hit or miss, but there's also a lot of paper, like not pictures, but paperwork about some of the houses. So it's like, this house on Thunderhead Drive, it's got a whole brochure. It's, you get pictures of the interior in the 60s, and it's got, I think it might even have the prices, which are hilarious. So there are different, and then we have photos of houses from different time periods. So if your house is relatively old in town, there's probably photographs of it in the museum, because at different times people have gone around and taken pictures of the older homes. We also have a very small collection of blueprints. So I feel like this is the lottery. If the person who built your house happened to have it financed by the Rockland National Bank in Suffern in a certain span of years, we have a blueprint. It's very small, This was a Storm's house. I don't know. I don't know whose house it is. I saw it just said Storms on the outside. But it's interesting that these models, these blueprints are made by Better Homes and Garden. So what people would do is they would get a plan from Better Homes and Garden, who hired an architect to draw them, and then they take them out and hire a local builder to build the house. So yeah, so it's neat. And it's just one box of rolled up blueprints. But like I said, if your house happens to be one of them, and I think I'm starting to make a list of the houses, then you could find an actual blueprint, which is neat. Okay, so some of the other collections are out there, these deed and land records. And I have to say that I think there's a little bit of misinformation in here. I found this, I said already, the 1970 to the present, but they say on the website that they have 1714 to 1962 and 1963 to 69, and they have a video that shows you how to access it. And when I follow directions for the video, I can't find the links that they tell me to click on. So I emailed them and they have not emailed me back. So it's still here, but you should be able, they have digitized them. The video showed it and they showed the pages. So you should be able to trace deeds all the way back, but you need to know the name of the family. So that's why I'm saying you want to get the information about the holders of the house, because this part is only done by people's names. So yeah, this is why people spend a lot. I mean, Tom actually went to the county clerk's office and made photocopies of deeds, for the Havemeyer properties, because that was what he was interested in. So I have like all the deeds for that property and where they sold everything. And he has this whole detailed history. But if you are looking for older stuff, you can go to the Bergen County clerk's office for it, but they claim to have them digitized. So I would call them up and say, how do I get those digitized records? Which I'll do soon, but I haven't. Okay, so there's a couple of caveats with deeds. Just because there's a property on the house where your house is now doesn't necessarily mean it's the same house. It could have been moved, it could have been burned. There's a lot that goes on between the times, and it's not, you want to look at and try to get that whole string of records of who owned the house from start to finish with no gaps, because then you'll be sure that it didn't get knocked down and a new house get put up in between two owners. One thing that people can do is when you look at the prices of houses and the valuations in tax books, if the property value goes up dramatically from one tax year to another, it often means that they either added an extension on the house or they built a new house on the property. So that we do have tax books for large chunks of Mahwah. And it's like, again, it's like people's name and the valuation doesn't have the address. So you need to have, it's always like this puzzle of people's names, the plot, the land. So you could get really lucky, and you could be one of these 9 houses in Mahwah that are on the National Historic Registry. There's plenty of history about these houses. You can find them in all kinds of resources, but most of us don't live in those houses. So there are state historic preservation sites that are a little bit more expansive, but they don't have as many resources about them. The older your house is, the more likely that there'll be a good story about it, because it has been covered over and over when they do these historic surveys. Oh, are they? Hopefully they're following the National Historic Guidelines for. Yeah. Yeah, so these houses also is bad to own because you have to pay through the nose to do anything. So the Bergen County Historic Sites Survey, those books are in the back. They're also available on the Mahwah Historic Preservation Commission's homepage. You can go to the bottom of their page, and there's PDFs of all these books, which is great. So the one thing I like about these is they have a big section in the front that's an architectural history of Mahwah. So it talks about the different developments and what kinds of houses were built and when they were built. So it gives you a really focused Mahwah history of the building in the area. And then they've got a couple of surveys that were used to gather photographs. There was a stone house survey for the whole county where they were looking for all the Dutch stone houses. And then there's this National Register survey where they're going and looking at them all. And each house that's in this survey, which are far more than the 9 historic ones, these are ones that are seen to be historic in Mahwah. I think there's 30 or 40 of them. But they get a whole page. There's photographs, there's descriptions of who owned the property, and there's a little bit of history. So these one, if you live in one of the houses that's in these books, you've got a good start on research because someone has already gone in and done some work on it. If you live in Cragmere, you're even more fortunate because Cragmere, if you don't know it, is the first kind of commuter neighborhood that was built in Mahwah around 1909, I think, 1908 I have here. And it has been documented better than any other section of town. There's 2 books back there, which are also available on the Historic Preservation's website that go through every home. So they'll have a picture of the house. They'll have a talk about who bought the original property. They'll describe the architecture, and they have like where it is in the town. We also had a map that I thought we had in the museum, but I think it's in storage right now that Tom Dunn did, which shows where each piece of property was bought in Cragmere the first time, so that you can see the development being created. So this is great if you're in luck if you live there, because you can start off with something that's already been done and is detailed. So the Cragmere is seen as a historic neighborhood, not so much every house in it are historic homes, but together they create a historic site because of the character of the neighborhood. So each, I think there's a lot of these pages will say this house in itself isn't super historical, but it's part of this district, which is historical. So that's why Cragmere has gotten a lot of attention. The houses are really also cool looking. So then another thing that we use are maps, and maps, I'm challenged by maps. I like them, but not as much as some people. This is, so the original Ramapo tract was bought from the Native Americans in 17 something or other, 1715 or something. And it was divided and divided and divided. And this is a very small piece of it, but it covers Mahwah. I don't want to step on the cord, but this is the New York border. So you can kind of see, these are the people that used to own the properties, and some of the names like Fox and Christie, and trying to see some of the other ones that I've recognized. Some of them are names that have been in Mahwah for years and years, so that families were there. And they eventually sold out the pieces to others. And so this map can give you a sense of like the oldest people and who owned the property in the oldest times of Mahwah. We have this Claire Thal version where she took the original map and she laid the plats on it. And that we have those upstairs. She has a whole book of maps for the historic towns. So this one was done in 1965, but it's really very carefully researched. So it's very trustworthy, even though it's a new version of the old map. So a lot of the maps that we have, the oldest ones, you don't think about Mahwah as being like, it was basically farms and some houses along a couple of roads. There wasn't much else here. So this is an 1861 map, and they put the people's names. Like here's A. Van Horn, G.H. Van Horn. This is Hopper's house, the Sheffield house. And that's all that's on these roads. This is 202. And then Franklin Turnpike, I think, is over there somewhere. But there really weren't a lot of roads. So different sections are developing at different times, but these main roads, you can start to see that they're still here. They're the same roads we have, but they just kind of fill in as we develop different areas of town. So depending on where your house is, you won't find, like in Fardale, I think there might have been one house, like a couple of houses there in 1861, but there's, the place where I lived wasn't a house. So you just kind of keep looking at the maps until you start seeing the roads that your house is on, and then you'll be like, okay, this is when my house came in. This is a 1970 map of Mahwah that again shows, you can see many more streets are in there, but the same, there's the same general map shape of it. So again, like we have a lot of maps from different years. You can take those and you can kind of just keep looking at them year by year to see when it is that your neighborhood starts to be developed. And we can get a good sense then. It helps for trying to figure out, when it happened and what was going on in town. This one is from 1913. And as they get newer, they're less likely to put the property names on them anymore because there start to be too many houses. So this is Cragmere here, where they can see there's all these tiny little plots. But these ones still have people's names, like the Wanamakers is a section. The Havemeyer Estate is over here. This is all Havemeyer property in 1913. So you can see who owns the property in these different time periods. So, it helps you to kind of work through it. And like I said, we have a lot of maps. A lot of them are sort of fragile, but we're trying to digitize them so that we can get them all on the website sooner rather than later, I hope. They're also topographical maps. And when I first thought these, I'm like, oh, they just show the elevation. But they also show houses. This is 1955, and it shows little dots where the houses are. So you can see, again, you can get, here's a 1955, and you can actually take these and make them translucent and put a Google Street Map underneath them and then try to get them to the same size. And you can see, oh, there's my house, and it's there. It's that little black dot right there. So we have a bunch of these, and they're also available on the web, so you can look at different time periods. The newer ones, though, don't show the dots of the houses. I don't know why. The older ones do, and the newer ones don't. But you can use these to try to figure out things too. So between all the different kinds of maps, you can really kind of go in and say, we can find some from the 40s and then the 50s and the 60s. And once you get into the 60s and 70s in Mahwah, that's when things really take off. And there's a lot more development. So there's often, that's where you need like maps that are more tight in the time frame. So the Sanborn insurance maps are one of my favorite things. They're these, we have one book of them. They're a map that they created for insurance agents. And they generally, in Mahwah, they only do the center of town. They don't do the whole town, but in like Patterson or New York City, it's the whole town. And it has the houses, and it has them coded by color, which will tell you things like, is it a stone house? Is it a wood house? Things that the insurance agents need to know, because it's more likely or less likely to burn. They also have outbuildings marked on the map, the ones that are businesses and the ones that are residential. And then they updated it. They updated it by taking little pieces of tissue paper and pasting over the old map with the new building. So we have one that has, we have a 1917 is online, and then we have 25, 34, 42, and 51. So you can see but it's again, only a small section of town, because that's where the insurance agents were, the places where there was more business and things. So this, this is us right here. This is, I think we are here. Yeah, this is the park, and here's the train tracks. There's Miller Road and Ramapo Ave. Yeah, so there's no fire station there. Okay, now this is a map Tom made that he sent me that I was like, whoa. This is how people, when farms were broken up in Fardale and sold to make developments. And it makes perfect sense if you look, because the place I lived in, it was sold in 1968 to make a development. My house was built in 1969. It's like, it all makes sense. But you can, he has the deeds for all of these apparently in his collection, which we are processing right now. But you can see how, and I think he uses color to tell you what years it is. So you can see how the Fardale was divided, the farms were all divided into becoming neighborhoods and properties. So I think, again, it can help you figure out when your development was created, and that can help you to find it and figure out what happened. All right, so I have a newspapers.com subscription, which, if you're willing to spend $100 a year, is the best money you'll ever spend when you're doing house history or any kind of local history, because it's really worth it. But it has mostly the Record and the Ridgewood News. And if you search for your specific address, you may find stuff, but it's not always that likely that the addresses were written. It is interesting how often they put people's addresses in the newspaper in the old days, which they do not do anymore. Because you'll see, John Smith of 1421 Westchester Road died yesterday. And you're like, okay, were they supposed to send cards? I don't know, but they give his address, people don't do that anymore in the paper, but you can look up addresses and you can find things like the Coleridge family's pet raccoons on 110 Armour Road. It's this whole story about these kids that adopted a bunch of raccoons, There's this one I love is the train that went off the rails and hit a house on Railroad Ave in 1970. So there's a lot of little stories that you can find that are specifically about your house if you get lucky and something interesting happened. But you can also search the street name and you can find out things that are going on the street. And sometimes you'll get the names of people. I mean, the stuff that they put in the news back then was like someone, there was a 7-year-old's birthday party at this street on Armour Road in 1920, and these children came, and it's like, it's kind of fun when you think about it. So I think that the addresses are a good thing to look at. The real estate news, like I said before, will make you cry because of the prices. The prices are so low. I mean, 1993, and there are houses for 300,000. There's condominiums for 100,000. There's a house to be rented in 1929 for $65 a month. So what often happens here is you don't always get the actual address. You might get the street or you get the development. They don't want to tell you the name, the actual address sometimes. Like this one, it just says it's on Armour Road. It doesn't say which house, but you could probably figure out, maybe looking at some of them, you might be able to figure out if it matched up with yours. But these ones are fun, and there's a lot that you can find in the house listings for homes to see, like especially if you know when someone bought the house, you can look for the listing and see what it cost and how much. And sometimes you'll be able to see news about who purchased it, but not always. Now, one of the other things that you can do is look for hints in your house for how old it is, for the kinds of things that were done there. There's so many sites out there with people that have old houses that are really interested in preserving them and bringing them back to life. I'm on one that's on Reddit. This is shocked that I ever will admit to being on Reddit, but I am. It's called Century Homes. And it's basically a bunch of people who have homes that are around 100 years old, and they're talking about how do you fix this and how do you do that and how do you age this. This person was asking, like, can you tell me what this hardware is? So there's things that you can find out by looking at the way your house was built. And the internet is full of people that have, put up old Sears catalogs that have the same doorknob that you have in your house that you can date that doorknob to. And now you can figure out how old your place is. That window is in the little vestibule in our house. And I'm trying to figure out a little bit more about it. But it looks like a Tiffany, but I'm sure it isn't because I don't think the people who built our house had that much money. But like we pulled up a floor, so that weird looking floor there, we pulled up a rug and that was underneath it, and we covered it with another floor, but we took a picture of it because we want people to know what's underneath the floor, so you can figure out again, like what does it look like, and before anybody thinks there might be hardwood under that vinyl floor that I put in, know that there's not. There's that crappy linoleum or whatever it is. So I think that looking at what and looking at the features in your house and trying to use those to help figure out what's going on and what the style was is another way to really help you to learn about its age. If you have an old house, you can use things like looking at hinges and nails to figure out how old it is. There's a specific kind of nail that will tell you your house is older than 1830. I don't have to worry about that. But, and what they suggest is if you're looking for things like hardware, look upstairs rather than downstairs. It's more likely people will change the doorknobs downstairs where visitors come. Less likely they'll do it on a closet door in their bedroom. They're like, oh, that knob is fine. So that's where you can start to think about what the oldest thing in your house is and try to figure out how to date things by that. I also think, like, I took down a hideous lamp that was in our kitchen and I didn't throw it out, even though I think it's hideous. I put it in a box in an old house and I stuck it in the basement. And I'm like, if we ever leave and someone really wants to bring this house back to its original format, they can have that lamp because I did not want it. But keep track of the stuff that you pull out and replace, because I think that helps again. There are some books that are very helpful. I don't know if you have gone through these yet, but the Pioneer to Settlement to Suburb is the only real history we have of Mahwah. And it will help you if you figure out where your house was. It'll help you show when did it come in when the railroads came in? Is it something that came in when the factories came in? Did it come in after World War II when it was a farm? It gives you that kind of historic background for what was going on in town. We also have a lot of these smaller books that are just little pamphlets. I think there's one of them out there, the historic home ones is in the back. And the Ramapo Chronicles is another really good history. It's very detailed, but it does focus on the Ramapo Reformed Church and its history, but it brings the whole history of the town in as well. And then there's some architecture books. I just cracked that one open back there. The Architecture of Bergen County has, again, more information about this specific area and how places were developed. We have books on what Dutch colonials or living in them were like in the 18 or 1900s. So I think that, you know, there are resources out there besides just generic ones that are specific to our neighborhoods. All right, so now we're going to talk about who lived there before you. So this is where you can trace that history of when, who built the house, who lived there first, you know, what property was it. This is the house we live in now, and we found out it's on Zabriskie Street in Haledon. Okay, so apparently there was a place called the Zabriskie Estate, which used to be on the corner of our next to where our house is now. And this guy, Pasquale Cono, was an Italian immigrant. He came into New Jersey around 1902, and he lived down in Essex County first, and then he moved up here and he bought that house, the Zabriskie Estate, and all the property around it. And we know by 1931, he built two houses. They don't look the same, but they're actually the same house, but flipped. And one is across the road from it, or like on the other end of the lot. Yeah, it's across the brook. And then, so him and his daughter lived in this house, and his son lived in that house. And then eventually they knocked down the estate because there's a church there now. That's the part I can't figure that out, when the church came in. But this woman, Ida, his daughter, lived in our house. And then right before they built the house, they actually put a street through the development of property they owned, and they called it Ida Street. And when I saw that, I was just like, oh, it's Ida Street. Okay. That is another thing you can do, is look at the names of the streets in your area, because a lot of times the names of the streets are the names of the property holders who either sold the land and then they put the street name on with the people that own the property. So at some point it was sold to this Christian Reformed church, and then they sold it in 1977 to my husband's parents. And they took all the land that was around the house. So we just have a driveway and a little backyard. But so I basically know everyone who lived in our house. It's not a long list of people because they kept it for generations, each family so far. But it gives you that sense of, you know, when you can see that things were done in the 80s, I know that it was his parents that did it. And when I see the old, you know, like this old plaster work, I know that it was Pasquale Cono and his son Charles who built the house, because they were builders. They actually built some of St. Joe's Hospital in Patterson and some schools. So that was their thing. And they built this house that, you know, is made of concrete and plaster and can't be moved or nailed into, apparently. Yes, it made our electrician cry. So one way that you can find who lived in the house before is to go through census records. Now, there's one bad thing about Mahwah. Because it was mostly rural, a lot of them there's no addresses. So oftentimes it will say, like here it says Wycliffe Avenue. This is the 1920 census. And then it has house number, and it doesn't say, it just says farm. So it doesn't have addresses, but if you look at it, it does go through a route. The guy knocked on each door in a row, so that if you see a house on Wycliffe Avenue and you can figure out who lived in that house, you can go 3 houses down and look at that house, and it will be the third house down. It's a little tricky. In Cragmere, there'll be addresses because they had street house, houses and numbers. But even when I moved into Mahwah in 1969, we were still writing RFD on the letters because it was rural delivery. So it was like, they didn't really nail down the addresses, at least until like the 50 census. But you can still find, like if you can get the name of one person, like the owner of the house, then you can pull the census up and you can find out the other people who live there. I always want to know everyone who lived in the house, not just the homeowner. But it'll give you things like their age, where they were born, their occupation. So it's kind of cool to know that, an accountant lived in my house and a teacher lived in my house, and a stonemason lived in your house. But so it gives you this really sense of the history of the place. The other trick is that in 1946, 7, something like that, Mahwah changed its name from Hohokus Township to Mahwah. So these censuses are for Hohokus Township. And actually, both of those are Hohokus Township. So you have to search that way in the databases. it's, I don't, there's a whole, a whole history of the townships and the name changes and the set places that broke off. And we are what remained. And that is, was Hohokus Township and became Mahwah. There is also a New Jersey census, which does suffer from the same problems as the other of no street addresses. But it's every it's every 10 years, but it's in between the national census. So you do have that extra time in between. Unfortunately, they have decided that 100 years old is, you can't see any of them there until they're more than 100 years old. So right now we can see 1915, but we can't see 1925 yet until 2025. So I don't really know why. But you can, again, it's this, you'll see the neighborhoods of the people all next to each other, and it will help you to figure out how that's working. We have town directories. They're very spotty. I have a few back there. The Women's Club did town directories from the 59 to 72, or that's what we have. There may be more. But they have street addresses for all the people in town. And so again, it gives you another touch point to look and see what it is. I'd like to digitize them so that they're searchable, because right now you have to know the name, but it would be nice to be able to find the address and then find the name that way. We also have, these are some of the things we're trying to collect to keep up with it, with history for later. We have a bunch of school directories from the late 90s to 2010s, which, you know, will be historical documents at some point. Right now, they still feel pretty fresh, but they're there. And we also have a ton of tax records, which I have barely opened the boxes on, but they list the address and they have tax payments and things on them, and they have the years, and there's decades of them. And again, like I know that they're probably useful for something, but it would require somebody really digging to find them. But we do have them, and eventually we'll get them organized. Okay, so once you have a name of a person, you can search for their names in the newspapers. And Charles Dempwolf died in my sister's bedroom. This is what happens when you search the newspapers for your address. You find that a man lost his fortune and drank carbolic acid in your bedroom. So, but it doesn't freak her out, so she's happy. I found out that we lived on DeGray Terrace, and the guy who owned the DeGray farm blew himself up in an accident in 1948. So sometimes you get good stories, sometimes you get grisly stories. You can also find the like obituaries of people. When we moved in to the DeGray house, the farmhouse is right across the street, and these two old ladies lived there, and they were Alice and Mary DeGray. And you know, we were kids, and they would come over and make us pick blueberries off their farm once in a while, and we were just like crazy old ladies. And now I'm like, oh, she was born in Shanghai. I could have asked her questions. I didn't care because I was 9, but you know, just it feels like, okay, I knew that person, you know, and you can start to see the different people that are out there. This one I found in the clippings file of the newspaper. It's a fire that happened to one of the houses in town. So you know, there's lots of stories, and once you have the names, that's the easiest way to find them in the papers. You can also, like I was saying, you can tell who did the renovations. If someone builds an external porch on your house, you can kind of figure out when it was in the 50s. Now you know who did it. You know, you can figure out who owned the house, and I think that's kind of fun. Photographs are another way that you can try to figure out how the house has changed. These actually are this is my grandparents' house in the Bronx, and that's my mom sitting up on the fence and her brothers. And then that's the house. I did a Google Street View of it today. My cousin lives there still, but I don't have a good picture of it. But you can see that it is the same house, though it's changed. They've changed the steps and they painted it differently. But just the idea that, you know, those backgrounds that we have in a lot of pictures of our relatives have, you know, like hints about the houses. And if I can, you know, take anything from digging around trying to find pictures of these old houses, like step back a little, don't cut it so close around the people, like get the house in the picture too, because it's, you know, that you will want to remember that at some point, and you'll be like, all I have is this little window, you know, because that's all I was more interested in the person. But one thing that has been really fun for me has been going back and doing like Google Street Views and Zillow searches for the houses I used to live in, and getting pictures of them. And I'm like, oh, that house in Long Island I grew up with, I go on there and I check it out. I have a little thing. If it ever goes for sale, then they'll put pictures of the inside and I'll go, download them and say like, that was my room. But I think that it's, you can find a lot in the photos. There's lots of little clues. Like I found a picture of my grandmother's garden, which I do remember from as being a kid. And I remember building another aunt's garden in Brooklyn. So that, just, like thinking about those pictures as being as important as just the people, I think sometimes it brings back different memories for you. And you might be able to get pictures from neighbors. My sister got a picture of her backyard, in the 80s from a person who lived next door, who was at a party, which is kind of fun. Okay, now we're in the final stretch. Okay, so if you want to start out trying to write your house's history, don't think that you have to produce like this perfect thing. It will be a work in progress. I would say start out with folders, maybe make a folder for each owner or family, or whatever clippings you can find, whatever pictures or articles or information you can find about a neighborhood, just kind of gather it for a bit and let it, percolate. You can think about who owned it before. You can think about changes that you've made to the house. And then maybe think of, at some point you might write it up. You might never write it up. You might just have it as like a folder that has the stuff in it. But if you feel like it, you can kind of say, this is what happened at my house. I think a timeline is a really good way to try to organize it to start. So you can start out saying, when was my house built? Once you get that, that date. And then who built, whatever information you have. And then the next time you can find it wherever it's on this map. It's not on this map, so it must be, in 1940, it doesn't exist. In 1950, it's on the map. So it was built somewhere in between. And you can add other things that happened in the neighborhood. Like there, you can say the next door neighbor's house got hit by a train in 1970, I mean, whatever things happen that you find out, you can add to your timeline so you get a sense of its house. I started making one for our house, and because I did it on a Word doc or something, I just started putting in the examples. Like I put in the clipping from the newspaper. I put in this Sanborn map. So this is, that big piece of blank is the property where my house is now. And it wasn't there in 1915. So you can just start putting in, like I put in the date that Pasquale came here, when Ida was born. So I'm getting a little story of this family. And eventually I'll turn it into something that's more narrative. But just for the start, I'm just trying to, figure out what happened and when, and putting in the examples as I find them. And then the photographing. We've been doing a lot of renovations to this house. So this is my husband's little hobby room it looked like a prison when we started. And then we put a new rug down. So I took a decent picture of what the floor looks like under it. And then we put shelves up and all that. We had this 1980s floor in our kitchen that we replaced with the vinyl plank flooring. And it looks like what, but it gives you a sense of what was there over time. And that's all going to go into my folders where you can see like what was there in the beginning and what was there now. And like, take pictures of your house when you're decorated for Christmas. Take a picture of the house, like show it, because you'll look at it years later and say, oh man, I remember when it looked like that, and like I said, take pictures of the whole house, not just like the tight shots of all the people, because I'm looking at, the pictures his family took in the 80s. And I'm like, come on, give me more of the house. All I see is, I know these people already. I don't need pictures of them. Some of the other things that you can do with photos, we always had a thing in my family where we would, they called them stair pictures. So like at Christmas, everybody would get on the stairs. And I don't think I'm in, yeah, I am in, no, I'm not in that one. My sister is. But we recreated it in our house in Mahwah, when we had our kids. And, if our next generation has any more, we'll do it again for them. But this house down here is a house that my grandfather was born in Ireland. And he went back in 1965, and you can still see that house in the background. I was able to take those two pictures and send it to a historian in Ireland. And he says, that house is still there. And he gave me the GPS coordinates to it. And he says, it's still owned by a Moran. So when we go to Ireland in a couple of years, we're going to meet that guy and try to get into that house and see what's there. But, and you can even document silly things. My daughter and I dropped the air conditioner out the window. And my daughter was holding onto it by the cord, and we couldn't pull it back in. So we took a picture to send to my brother-in-law to say, come help us, please. And he did, and he hauled it right back in. So, but I was like, that picture, I'm never going to forget the day the air conditioner fell out the window because I have a picture. So, when things happen, like we used to have a basement that flooded, and I remember my mom dancing around in the water, and I never took a picture of that, and I wish I had now. But, it's like, your house is part of the family. It's part of the story. So like try to get the pictures in there as well. I think it's fun. And also think about things like the house when you think about writing down about the house you grew up in or the house you live in now, like which bedroom was yours? What was it like? Did you have to share your room with your sister? Did you fight? All the stuff that happened in the house is just as, is as important as just the building itself. Think about the house as a place like, where did you like to go? Where was your favorite place? Where does the cat like to go? And, write that stuff down because nobody, that's the kind of stuff you don't think to pass on to people. And it makes your feeling of your home a lot more personal, I think. And I think it's fun to try to, remember, they think of the house as a family member, all the different ones you've had. All right, this is going to be the end. So if you do gather stuff about your house and it's in Mahwah, please give us some. Please give us a copy. We'll put it in a folder. It will be here for the next person who comes and asks about that house or your family, and we'll have that information. We get requests constantly from people who move into a house in town asking about the history of their house. That's one of the reasons I decided to try to do this talk, is to try to give people some tips on how to start. But that, we will store that stuff and we'll keep it, and it will be here for people because they do come to us and we don't always have the information that they want. But yeah, we really want to know about the history of all your houses, about all your families, and we want to make that available to anyone who needs it. So thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. I forgot. I'll put the slideshow up and they're going to record it, the talk. I did forget to say at the beginning that for the Zoom people, if you put questions in the chat, Ken will read them out. But if anyone has questions,
if you could just wait until I come to you with a microphone, this way our Zoom people could hear your question.
No questions.
My house was moved, like originally it was on Route 202.
Right.
And then it was moved to Catherine Avenue, Mahwah.
Okay.
How do I find out? Because nobody knows where exactly it was.
Where it was.
It was by Janix, but nearby.
Okay.
So how would I find out?
That I would start with the newspapers, because stuff like a house getting moved sometimes makes the paper. And the town is supposed to have records. Do you know when it happened?
Well, the house was built in 1921, so it happened somewhere between that and 1950.
Okay, so it's pre the building, the stuff that's online. So that, yeah, I don't know.
It was a store, maybe a church.
Right.
It has a history.
Yeah.
What it
So we have to.
is.
And do you know who owned it?
No.
Okay. Well, I think that's our first step. Like if you you guys can all send me your stuff and I'll try to find it. But yeah, if we can, the fact that it's moved is like an event that would probably get some kind of mention somewhere, right? So if we can find, we know where it is now, and we can try to figure out when it moved. We probably can figure out when it appears in that place, right? Like we can check the Bergen County land records to see when they think it was built. I have a feeling that when they think it is built might be when it was moved, right? Because it would be the first time it's on that property. So the tax records might help with that to get that date. And then we can try to go back and see.
And where do I start to get the tax records?
The website has information about when they think the house was built on the Bergen County website. And then we have to figure out how to get those older deeds, because that I'm still waiting for them to answer my email. Yes.
What records does our county clerk currently have over on Corporate Drive? Like if we go to
The town clerk.
yeah.
They, sorry, town clerk, but they didn't answer my email. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I asked, but I haven't heard back.
Okay.
The county is usually where that stuff is stored.
Oh.
There's supposed to be, in some of the books that I've read, it says your municipal clerk may have copies of deeds, it may have blueprints, it may have all this, but it doesn't appear so from our town's website anyway.
Bergen County.
Bergen County would be the place. That's the Bergen County
courthouse in
clerk's
Hackensack.
office. Yes. Yes.
If we want to use the museum's resources,
Right.
what do we have to do? Like, do we have to come
If-
in ahead of time, or like, how do we
If
call
you-
you ahead of time, or how does that work?
You can email at archives@mahwahmuseum.org and let me know what you want. And if it's stuff in the actual archives, I can pull it for you and have it ready for you. I'm usually here on Saturday mornings when the museum isn't open, but I can have stuff ready that you could come in when we are open, or we can make a time for you to come in.
We live in Craigview, so,
Oh, yeah.
you know, that-
Right.
you said you had a lot.
Yes, there's a lot. And you can start with the survey, which is on the Historical Preservation Society's website. It's actually printed out right back there, so you can look at it. You can pull up, that's by address, so you can look at your address and then see what they have. But it depends on where you are. We might have a lot more than that.
What was the address?
Oh, it's archives@mahwahmuseum.org.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll get to me. And what usually you can either, if you want a lot of stuff to research, we'll make a time that you can come in, and either you can come in during the week and Caitlin can let you in. She's our assistant. I'm only there on weekends because I work. But we'll make it happen. Mhm. Got any Zoom questions? No? All right. All right, I had one. I'm supposed to tell you that the next lecture that we'll be offering is on April 25th by Michael Yanone, I think. And it's the full story of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So that will be, I did not know there was a full story. I will find out. All right, thanks very much for coming, and feel free to look at some of the stuff we have back there. And we'll see you soon. Thanks very much. Thank you.